Welcome to Inside the Care Home. This is a podcast for care home owners and senior leaders who are trying to run outstanding care services in a world that's getting more complex, more digital, and more demanding by the year. Each episode is an honest look at the decisions, trade-offs, and mistakes that sit behind the day-to-day reality of operating a care home, where data and digital systems shape outcomes, but it's leadership that determines whether they help or hinder. This isn't about tools or trends. It's about thinking clearly, leading well, and building care homes that are sustainable for the people who live in them and the people who run them. So let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's slightly different DigiHive session from our traditional webinars, because this is a chance and a conversation for us to have a chat by stepping back from the day-to-day pressures of running a care service, and for us really to reflect upon what leadership in the sector looks like right now as we move into 2026. And I think care leaders are operating in an incredibly complex environment. Expectations are rising, resources are stretched, and scrutiny is just constant for us as care providers. Many of us as leaders are making high-stakes decisions every single day, often with very little space to actually pause and think. That's why I'm really pleased to be able to be joined today by Professor Martin Green OBE. Martin is not only the Chief Executive of Care England, but also one of the strongest and most consistent voices for care providers up and down the country. Martin spends a lot of time speaking to and influencing policymakers, the regulator, local authorities, the NHS and providers across the country. So he has a unique perspective on where the sector is heading and what leaders are facing on the ground. So today we're here to talk really honestly and openly about why leadership feels harder than ever and why intuition alone isn't always enough anymore, and why we as care providers need support now and we don't need more pressure. Martin, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Samir. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think there are some big issues for the sector, and hopefully we'll be able to tease some of those out in today's discussion.
Fantastic. So as I mentioned, Martin, you speak to providers, policymakers, commissioners, and the regulator fairly constantly, I think. Yeah. And from where you sit, how would you describe the reality of running a care service right now?
Well, I think the answer to that is it's extremely tough, and it has got tougher and tougher year on year. Not only have we seen resources shrinking, but we've also seen increased scrutiny. We've got scrutiny from commissioners particularly, and commissioners are often focused not on the outcomes to individuals, but on the funding and the bottom line. We've seen really significant challenges around funding, and that's had a really big impact on our sector. It's also been a challenge because of staffing. So getting the right staff and keeping those staff are big challenges in our sector. So all these things land on the desks of managers and leaders in social care, and they are trying to juggle this complexity and trying to make sure that in all these complex areas they have one singular focus, which is the quality of care they provide and the outcomes they deliver to the people they support.
I think you're absolutely right. I think leadership in care feels kind of harder than ever, and I've been doing this for about 21 years now. Why do you think that is? Why do you think things just seem to be getting harder for us as providers, Martin? Is it the regulation? Is it, as you mentioned, funding, the expectations? It's just this combination maybe of everything.
Well, I think it is a combination of everything, Samir. I think over the years, what we've seen really significant challenges around funding. We've also seen regulation. And one of the things that we should acknowledge is the regulator has been in absolute chaos for a long time. But of course, what that hasn't done is it hasn't translated into next to no regulation. It's translated into a regulator that has been behaving bizarrely and inappropriately in many cases. So that has been another challenge. We've certainly seen greater expectations from service users and their families, and I think that's only right, but it is another pressure, and it's a pressure which is heaped on to people delivering services at a time when there has not been really the opportunity to stand back. And I think one of the things that's happened is all these things have been hitting the sector, and so people who are in leadership and management roles are on a treadmill, and it's sometimes very difficult to get the time and headspace to step off that and to look at it in a more balanced way.
Absolutely. I think one thing that we as leaders, and from a business perspective, is we like that clarity, don't we? We like to know where we're being judged against. I suppose leaders were being asked to try to deliver more, but with less of that clarity, as you raised that point about the regulator.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what I would say is as well, to every leader and to every manager, there is nothing more important than clarity. And when the system around you is trying to blur the edges, what you have to do is provide that clarity and focus for your services, for your colleagues, and for the people you support. And so I think there has been this really significant blurring of the edges. But I think we as care providers have to provide the clarity that should be in the system.
Fantastic, thank you. I think a lot of providers that we speak to as well in the DigiHive are very well experienced providers, and over the years they've built up this IP and this knowledge, and they've got a lot of intuition. And care leaders still today, I think, rely heavily on that experience and that gut instinct when they come to make decisions about the direction of travel they want to take their service in. I just wonder, from your perspective, do you think that's becoming more difficult to rely upon as your IP, that kind of gut instinct and that experience? Has the system just become a bit too complex for that? And are we foolhardy in thinking we can still operate in that same way moving forward, do you feel?
Well, I think, intuition and experience is vital, but I think it also has to be balanced with data and rational decision making. So I would say, as you get more experienced in your role as a leader or a manager, you do get a lot of intuition. But what you've got to do is to check that intuition by the use of data, by the use of rational decision making. And partly that's because whatever decisions you make, you may have to justify later. And so going to a justification meeting and saying, well, my gut told me this, frankly, will not cut it. So you have to say, my experience told me this, and this is how I validated this as the correct decision. And I used my data, I used my experience, I used my knowledge of the person, I used clarity about what I wanted to achieve as an outcome. And all those things led me to a decision. But I think all managers and leaders should remind themselves that every decision we make may be a decision that's challenged. And so when we make that decision, we need to have absolutely crystal clarity about why we made the decision, what were the resources that we used at our disposal to make us have that backdrop to making the decision. So I think you're right to say it's an important part of decision making, but now we're in a complex situation and we can't rely on only our intuition. It has to be backed up.
And I think there is a huge amount of data out there available to providers right now with the digitization that's taken over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. I think it would be irresponsible maybe in some ways of us not to help try and use some of that data to help us in that decision making.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the problems is that we do have with digitalization much more data, but I'm not sure what we've got is the understanding of how we use data. And what we need is we need something that will take us from a swamp of data into a data lake that we can navigate across. And I think one of the elements of having all this extra data is now as a sector, we need to be much clearer on how we support one another to understand what it means and to use it effectively.
So just building on that point then slightly, what role do you think that data and the evidence that data helps us provide now plays almost in protecting us as providers rather than just being used to scrutinise us with? We've always got that opportunity now, haven't we, to be able to, as I say, protect ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things I would say to care providers is that the only way data can be misused is when somebody else understands it and you don't. So I would say to all care providers, make sure you not only have data, but you understand it and you understand what messages it can deliver to you. It can tell you what works. It can tell you what are critical intervention points. It can move your service from being reactive to being proactive. And so I would say anybody who's got data sets is they need to be really clear in how they understand them, and they need to be using them proactively rather than just reactively.
I suppose the flip side to that, in terms of, we've spoken a lot about evidencing to external agencies the data we have. I think it's also quite powerful, isn't it, for us to use some of that data internally, sharing that data within our teams, making sure they're empowered to understand it, then helps our teams grow and become more confident with their decision making as well, I feel.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think data should be everybody's business. It shouldn't be something that's locked away in a manager's office or something that's only seen by the board or the senior team. Let everybody engage with what data can do in the delivery of good quality care. And then suddenly people realize why they're collecting it. It suddenly gives them some reason to say this is useful to the people we support and to us.
Absolutely. And from your perspective, Martin, do you think that care providers are being supported enough? Or are we being managed through the pressure that we're feeling as providers at the moment?
I think, Samir, it's a mixed picture. I think, there are some people who are getting good support, but often it's because they are going and reaching out for it. And there are others who are literally struggling and they don't know where to turn. So I think that there is a bit of a mixed picture. But what I would say to care providers is there is a lot of support out there. Of course, I would say this, wouldn't I? But, Care England members get a lot of information, advice, support, opportunities to network. They get access to really great products and services through our partnership with commercial providers such as yours. So I think, if people really have the time to just take a step back, think about what support they need, it is out there. So I think, it's about how proactive the provider is.
Fantastic, thank you. And I just want to circle back quickly, if we can, just that word consistency we used earlier on. As I mentioned at the outset, you're involved with providers and regulators and commissioners up and down the country. In terms of consistency for a provider who's maybe dealing with multiple local authorities and multiple NHS commissioners, from a data perspective, are we seeing anything on the horizon that can give us hope as providers that we know a general direction of travel we need to be going in?
Well, sadly, I think that there is a great deal of inconsistency in the sector, and you see it in things like regulation. You certainly see it in commissioning. You've got 300 plus authorities who are commissioning. You've then got the ICBs, and all these organisations seem to sit in silos and make it up as they go along. And that makes it extremely difficult for care providers who are working across organisational boundaries and working with different commissioners and different bits of the system. So I would say the first thing around consistency is I would, as a care provider, get my own view about what I want from data, support and a narrative, and make sure that my narrative is consistent. And then I know that I'll have to work with a great deal of inconsistency across the system. But as long as I, as an organisation and as an individual, understand where I'm being consistent, it will then help me to navigate some of the vagaries of inconsistency across the system. But a good example I heard recently of a provider who was working across different local areas. They had installed safety monitoring, which I think is really useful. And in one area, the Care Quality Commission regulator had said, this is absolutely fantastic. It's really a great addition to what you're doing, and it helps to develop quality. And then it was 102 miles up the road. They were told, this is outrageous. You should not be using this. This is not what we would want to see. So that level of inconsistency makes it extremely difficult for care providers to come up with coherent positions when they're working in a very inconsistent system.
Yeah, I feel that, the system, we do need to be working together and collaboratively. Strong care and outcomes for care relies upon this consistent approach from the regulator as well, doesn't it? And the support versus pressure conversation, I think, is really important, and is only going to be exacerbated as we move forward with, say, some of those financial challenges.
Yeah, that's so.
Just moving on, if I may, if you were advising a care provider today or a care leader today, what kind of support would you say they need more of, sort of beyond funding, Martin? What do you feel would be vital for them?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is very poor is giving people an understanding of what works well. So I think getting people to see what particular models are working in different areas and having some kind of bank of information about this is something that particular provider's done and it's worked would really help. I also think that particularly managers and leaders need time to just take a step back and be given the headspace to think more creatively about what they're doing. I also think one of the other areas that is a real opportunity is for people to come together in networks and support and learning sets so that you're not feeling that you're working on your own and in isolation. Now, I know some larger organizations do give their colleagues great opportunities to come together, but I'd also like to see some opportunities for people in localities and regions just to get a bit of ongoing support. Many, many years ago, I was a chief executive in the Age Concern Federation. I was very young, very inexperienced, and probably not very good. But I was supported brilliantly by 3 fantastic colleagues who were CEOs of age concerns in neighbouring boroughs and who very happily took me under their wing. And what we used to do was occasionally meet up, occasionally phone each other, just give each other a bit of time to discuss things. They would reflect on my decision making. I would explain to them why I did things. They would explain to me why they might have done things slightly differently. And that enabled me to have a lot of support. And I think one of the challenges in the social care sector is that we don't often find ways of supporting one another.
I think you touch on a really important point, and one that's really close to our heart here at the DigiHive. And that is this role of mentoring and community, really to help drive that that confidence that leaders need. That, as you say, that time to step back and that peer learning and that space to think and reflect upon what's going on in your service and seek that guidance. And as I said, mentoring is a key component of what we do here at the DigiHive. And from your experience, you've given us some examples there. Having that space and that time to think, it's not, some people sometimes often think of mentoring as therapy or training and maybe a thinking space. I'm not so sure it is that for me.
No,
how do you feel about mentoring?
No, I mean, I think mentoring is absolutely vital, and it certainly isn't therapy and it certainly isn't training. What it is giving yourself time to reflect. It's also having people that you trust to enable a conversation to happen. And it's also giving you the space sometimes to say, I made a mistake. I did it wrong. I would want to analyze why I did that and what were the pressures that led me to make that decision. And mentoring can really help you in that space because it gives you not only somebody who you trust to talk it through with, somebody who's experienced and who's been through probably similar positions as you, but it also gives you a space where there is trust and you can say things to a mentor that you would never dare say to a commissioner or a line manager or anybody else. And that is what helps you develop and grow as a leader and a manager. So I think, and you mentioned, Samir, the issue about was it therapy, was it training? I think it's more important than both those things because it really does get to the core of defining you as a leader and as a manager, and it helps you in that process. Because one of the things that I think we're very bad at in the UK is being clear about what our own style of leadership and management is. And everybody needs to develop a style that is absolutely compatible with who they are as people. And if you're somebody who's collaborative, it's no good trying to develop a management or leadership style that comes out of the Attila the Hun type of approach. Similarly, if you're an Attila the Hun, you might need to reflect on what will be the best way to develop your management style. And mentoring can really help you in that process.
And I think when you couple mentoring with community and that peer learning you mentioned earlier on, it becomes a truly powerful force, doesn't it? Because learning from others facing those same challenges as you are, it really is, as you say, invaluable and positive. And in this increasing kind of complexity that we have in social care, how vital do you feel that a provider taking part or a leader taking part in one of these learning hubs or communities is invaluable for the moving forward in these increasing complex times?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely invaluable because it gives people a feeling of being supported, and it enables them also to have that time when they're not actually on the front line, and they can reflect on what they're doing, the impact they're having on colleagues, on the people they support, whether or not there are things they need as leaders and managers to support them. And I think that has to be an essential part of delivering good quality care. It also stops burnout.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing, we often talk about residents that move into our services. One thing that we find in my small group of homes is that we see this massive increase in residents' engagement and their health and well-being. And one of the things I put that down to is they're no longer socially isolated, which I feel is a real negative driver. And I feel we need to borrow some of that brilliance from what we apply for our residents and apply that to our leaders and our managers. You know, if we can get them not being leadership isolated, as it were, I think that's really valuable for people, and it will help us retain those managers that we want to in the sector, and it will help us drive forward that quality that we're all in this because we want to deliver the best care that we can, and I think the community and the mentoring can really help us feed that.
No, I absolutely agree. And I also think you touch on a very important point there, which is about the values of the organisation should be manifest not only in the way we support people in our care, but also how we work with our colleagues. You know, if you are asking colleagues to be reflective, if you're asking colleagues to support individuals with their transition to being a care home resident, etc., you need to also show the same amount of support, and the same core values need to be absolutely evidenced in the way that you support your colleagues.
Thank you for that. Another common comment we get within our forums and with our group mentoring sessions we have with our DigiHive members is that there's an awful lot of technology out there now, Martin. You know, there's a lot of technology, and providers are almost spoilt for choice. And one thing we often talk about is actually the tech alone doesn't deliver the impact that we want it to. It is the people. So how can we as providers and as leaders ensure that by moving forward, the technology actually delivers, and that we build this confidence and we build the understanding, and that we have a wraparound support around the implementation of technology in our services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point. There is a lot of tech out there, but I think we have to have a framework on what we're going to use. And firstly, any technology should be absolutely set against in my view, three very clear criteria. So firstly, how does it improve the quality of care and support that we offer to the people in our care? Secondly, how does it improve the working environment and the quality of work for those who deliver care? And thirdly, how does it improve efficiency and the bottom line? And if you have a very simple framework and you make every decision about what technology you're going to implement on that basis, I think you won't go far wrong. And I think we should also remember that care is very much about relationships. And so it's about saying it's not tech care, it's tech enabled care. And what we should be doing is using technology to do the heavy lifting that enables us to do the really important thing, which is the relationships between those who we support and our colleagues.
I think it's also important, isn't it, that the technology sits inside the right environment. You touched upon the values of the organisation. And I think one thing, again, we try to promote within our forums is that, you know, the leaders can ask questions. You know, the technology has to allow us to ask those insightful questions that can help us drive that improvement we want. And that staff retention, it might well be, or understanding our inquiries better. And I think building that confidence over time is vital for providers. Any top tips from you, from your perspective, about how providers can understand that a bit better, not only at a local level, but maybe at a national level as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is talking to people who are using technology. And the other thing we don't do enough of in our sector is we don't do enough of talking to tech people about what we want. Now, one of the things that I've found over my time, and I've just taken over as the chair of the Technology Services Association. So I'm really now very focused on technology. And one of the things that I think we don't do enough of, we do often say, oh, but that technology doesn't quite do what we want it to do. And then I always say, well, did you tell the techie that's actually what you wanted? Because I've yet to meet a techie who can't deliver what we want. So I think it has to be about a conversation between those who deliver care, those who deliver technology, and also a recognition that as we use that technology, we'll get more and more knowledge about how it works, and we'll be able to work together with technology providers to refine and develop it.
And that again comes back to us as leaders, right? Not being in this reactive firefighting state, by making sure we're trying to build an environment where we can take time out to sit back and reflect, so that we have time to have those conversations with those important technologists, because ultimately they want to build products that we want to use, and they've got to be useful for us. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think we have to take the impetus on that and make sure we are feeding back to providers. And again, something very close to our hearts that we do with our knowledge partners within the DigiHive is trying to be that bridge to help make sure we can share that information.
Yeah, no, that's so important. Getting people together and sharing information and sharing experiences, and then hopefully that will be the basis of people understanding the benefits of technology and delivering technology that makes a difference. And that has to be where we position ourselves in relation to technology.
Thank you. So if you could leave the care leaders up and down the country with one message right now, Martin, what would that be?
I think it would be take time to reflect, take time to invest in yourself as a leader, and don't always think that you have to be constantly on a treadmill. And the other piece of advice I would give to every single leader is don't take responsibility for the things that are not your fault. And I think this is a big challenge often. We have situations where government policy changes and that has a negative effect. And what leaders in our sector tend to do is they take on the responsibility for that. Well, it's not their responsibility. It might be their responsibility to mitigate the impact and to make it better for the people who use services and the people who are our colleagues delivering them. But it is not your fault that policy changed. And you are then in the role of a leader and a manager, navigating your way through it, not taking responsibility for it.
Controlling the controllables, right? That's all we can do as leaders. I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely.
I agree with you more. And we always like to end on a positive. And, this wonderful sector that I've had the privilege of working in for the last 20 years. What gives you optimism about the future of care in the country, despite some of the pressures we've spoken about? We all need that North Star, that guiding light that keeps us wanting to stay hungry, keeps us grounded, and wants to help us drive forward our services to give the best care that we can. What are you optimistic about, Martin?
Well, surprisingly, I'm very optimistic about the future, and it's all based on the people in our sector. They're dynamic, they're creative, they're driven by their values. They want to make a difference in people's lives, and they do make a difference day in, day out. And what we find is that however difficult the external environment is, those people never stop absolutely stepping up and delivering. And I know that they will constantly deliver whatever the external environment throws at them. And that's why I have so much confidence. It's about the creativity of the people in our sector, and they've delivered for years. And also I'm seeing some fantastic younger people coming through who are going to take over the mantle from old war horses like me when I'm finally put out to grass. And that gives me great confidence in the future.
Well, hopefully that's a long way away. We don't look forward to that too much, but I really want to thank you for your time today. And one of the things we're trying to do through the collaboration with Care England is to create a space where leaders feel supported and they're not judged, and where they can think, reflect and learn together. And that's exactly why we created the Care Home DigiHive. We wanted to create a space where care home leaders could come together, learn from one another, and through mentorship and learning from experts in the industry, we can really reinforce why that matters. So I really want to thank you, Martin, for your time this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, and I want to thank you, Samir, because also the DigiHive is so useful and so important. And it's so great that somebody has come up and said, I'm not going to only focus on my own organisation, but I'm going to make sure that there is something in our sector that can help everybody. And I think that's a really brilliant thing that you've done. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. And thank you for your time this afternoon. We look forward to our continued partnership.
Me too.
Running a care home rarely gives you time to step back and think. Most days you're just moving from one decision and on to the next. But this podcast exists to pause that momentum for a moment, to look at what's actually happening inside care homes, the pressures, the trade-offs, the things that don't always make it into the reports or the meetings. So if something in this episode felt familiar, I hope that's intentional. These conversations aren't about having perfect answers. They're about seeing the reality more clearly, so the next decision is better than the one before. I'll continue this inside look next time. This is Inside the Care Home, an honest look at the decisions and realities behind running care homes today. Thanks for listening.